Anxiety disorders are a group of disorders, so it's not just one thing, but there are different types of it. But they all around a similar theme, which is anxiety. And when we say anxiety, we are looking at excessive fear or worry. Now, everybody experiences anxiety. If you're in a situation that you feel your capacity to meet a certain expectation might not really be meeting it 100%, then it could incite a sense of anxiety. Okay. And quite often use the terms fear and anxiety in these descriptions will be given. They overlap a lot, but then they are a little different to some extent. Well, with us when we are talking about these terms, we are talking about fear. We are looking at a perceived, whether real or perceived, imminent threat. So we are looking at something that might be happening right now or like in a short few moments. So that's where we tend to focus more on fear because that one there's a perceived imminent threat. But anxiety kind of has a sense of not imminent, but then you kind of foresee it. So there's some time space in there, and it may also be real or perceived as well. Now, with these disorders, as we said, everybody experiences these anxieties, but these tend to be excessive compared to the situation that we'll be talking about. So, with such situations, everybody experiences them, but with persons with these disorders, the sense of fear and worry tends to be a bit excessive in its nature compared to what we would expect for that situation. And then it also begins to impact on the person's ability to function. So it takes a toll on the person's day-to-day lives and makes the person sometimes make some changes to the way they behave, just trying to avoid either avoid the stimulus that causes the anxiety or trying to handle that whole anxiety episode. So when it gets to these extremes and begins to impact life to these extents, then we think a disorder, or we say a disorder is at play. So different factors come together for these conditions to manifest or to be said to be present in an individual. And for each condition, the extent to which genetics or environment might be applied might be a bit variable. But for most of them, we understand that yes, there's a huge proportion that has to be inherent, hereditary, and that's inborn, like genetic in its nature. Of all of them, the one that we call agoraphobia is said to have the strongest link with hereditary, so the genetic component. Other types have it varying, but then some not the extent of agoraphobia. Then again, there's a strong component about it being related to the environment, so we say acquired. So for various types, different environmental triggers might be actually a bit more. So for something like panic disorder, we have things like childhood experiences, sometimes adverse childhood experiences. It can be physical abuse, it can be sexual abuse, emotional form of trauma, sometimes even the kind of home environment, amongst others, might all kind of lead to someone having onset during childhood and then it's kind of continuing right into adulthood. For some type of phobias, like the specific phobias, which there are different types. For example, someone who has an imminent fear of maybe, let's say, even blood or needles or something. Sometimes the person might have had an exposure to an experience with something in particular. Something might be a personal experience. It sometimes may be something that another person experienced that they observed or something they witnessed. And that traumatic experience or how the experience impacted them may lead to them generating or developing these phobias and anxiety disorders that might carry on into adulthood. So different aspects come into play, but the proportions might vary for different conditions. What I would say in response to that is that all of them cut across happen worldwide, but just that maybe the trends might vary and also the data we may have might kind of skew it to certain demographic areas. So the strength of our research or our data might not be as strong as other environment, social or cultural environment, so the comparison becomes a bit difficult. But for most of them, the data are very solid for especially the developed world, US, UK, Europe. They have very strong data, and so they can give specific percentages. With us, it's a bit dicey because we don't have that. But then even amongst them in their setting, they would kind of classify for different races. So that's among Caucasians, among Asians, amongst Africans. So with most of these, oftentimes Africans are kind of in between, not necessarily at the top per se. But then I'll just like to add on that anxiety disorders are the most common mental health disorders worldwide. So if you're looking at mental health disorders, the most common mental health disorder in the entire world is anxiety disorders. In some populations, as much as 30% of the population would experience it. Um, that said, doesn't mean every person who experiences it ends up with a psychiatric institution or getting mental health care. Most people would not seek medical treatment for it, and most also would show up in a general setting for some of the symptoms they might experience. So, for panic disorder, panic attacks, persons with these disorders often, amongst all the anxiety disorders, they are most likely to get in contact with health services, and they would often first, quite often, hit the general medical field, and they maybe subsequently be referred to the psychiatrist or psychologist or mental health services as is needed. Lumping all together sometimes makes it a bit difficult because each type has its a kind of way it flows, and so there are some that might be a bit predominant during childhood. So for childhood, for example, you may see things like separation anxiety disorder, where a child doesn't want to be separated from the primary caregiver, or and that separation leads to some form of anxiety. So that type, and then also selective mutism might be seen a bit more during childhood as well. But as said, even the other types, let's say social anxiety, generalized anxiety, even the phobias we spoke about, they might start off in childhood, and different age ranges come in. So for some, like the social anxiety, you might say 13 thereabout might be a period at which first symptoms might be seen. Some you might not even really pick it up during that period, but as time goes on and they finally get in contact with health services, when we take a history and kind of look back at when these symptoms started, then you realize that it had started much younger, really during the childhood and adolescent periods. So it's kind of varies for the various conditions, but then usually around childhood, adult, adolescence periods, you might have some of these initially starting up. There are some also that would kind of be a bit more prevalent during the adulthood period. So something like a general anxiety disorder, they say average is around 30 years thereabout. But then again, it's not fixed per se. Most might start off, but not like a fresh baby would come in and be having these. And how they present to might be a bit different. So in childhood, for example, when a child is anxious, they might manifest mainly by throwing tantrums and getting clingy. So you know that they keep holding on to a person they feel safe with, not wanting to let go. Some might have some nightmares, amongst others. So the manifestation during that period may be a bit different, and pinning it down sometimes may be a bit difficult because they might not be able to communicate it as well. So those are some of the challenges we might have with these. But sometimes often observing and following the trends might give clarity with time. Yeah. So I'm speaking about the specific types of anxiety disorders. For now, I think would kind of focus a bit more on the generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety, agoraphobia, um, then panic disorder, and then some specific phobias. Okay. So with a generalized anxiety disorder, as the name suggests, it's kind of generalized in the sense that the person who experiences this does not experience it to a specific one specific thing. So it might be with some situations. It might be with work, it might be with home, it might be different environments, but the person generally has a sense of heightened anxiety most of the time. So they feel tense, they might feel restless, they may feel like having muscle tension, easily getting angry as well, and generally feeling on edge most of the time. That's kind of the sense the individual experiences It's quite pervasive, and it continues for a period of time. So it's not like just one day of experience, but this kind of continues. And some criteria even put at least 6 months of experiencing this continuously. Okay, most like it being very prominent for most period of times. And for this, for most original anxiety disorders, it tends to be a bit more common in females compared to men. So it's kind of follows a trend of the depression as well, more common in females than men. And this generalized anxiety disorder, as said, um, it's not specific to a specific thing, so it's all different aspects. Quite often, it might occur in, I would say, comorbidity. It might occur with other conditions as well. So it might occur with a depressive disorder. It might occur with some PTSD. It might occur with some also substance use disorder, commonly alcohol. It could occur with those as well. So that's how it generally runs in its trend. So with social anxiety disorder, with this, the excessive worry and the excessive fear is mainly with regards to the person having to be in a situation where they might have to be the focus of attention. So the person kind of fears being scrutinized. The person fears being the center of attention. So if the person has to, for example, give a speech, or the person has to even be in a setting where they feel like they are being scrutinized. So even someone meeting an unfamiliar person, having to speak with them, then they get this heightened anxiety. And so they try as much as possible to avoid these scenarios altogether. And so that's where we talk about the social anxiety. And this can be very debilitating for some people to the extent that they would do anything to avoid it. So it can start to hamper work, school, activities as well. And in the extreme cases, you have some people even dropping out of school because they can't handle that kind of setting. And even with work to performance, for someone whose work is being a center of attention, if you're an artist, you have to be there, or even giving presentations, it might really hamper one's productivity. And so that might push someone to need a medical intervention as well. So that's social anxiety disorder generally. Then talking about the agoraphobia. So agoraphobia is, just to summarize, is also an anxiety disorder. But in this case, the person experiences the heightened anxiety when they have to be in a state where they essentially it all boils down to when they feel they can't escape, or they feel like they can't get help during that period. I can't get help. So some of the scenarios might vary. So one might be when the person has to be in open places, for example, a marketplace, or the person has to be on a bridge. So the person feels like, in that setting, I can't really escape. I feel like I can't escape. Or for some persons, it might be a scenario where they feel like they are rather in a closed space. So in a shop, in a theater, amongst others. For others, it might be when they have to be even on public transportation. So that person has that heightened anxiety during that period of time. For others, too, it might be when they might even have to be alone, so they wouldn't want to even leave home, especially the children. That's where that comes into. And in the extreme case, someone might just be homebound because they can't leave home because they don't feel comfortable in any other setting. And when they are out, they feel like this very heightened sense of anxiety. And all this anxiety, I keep saying, it begins to manifest physically. Okay, so it begins to manifest physically with symptoms like the person becomes very breathless, the person starts sweating, they're having tremors, and they feel like they are choking, you can't breathe well. Some will have dizziness, palpitation, the heart is beating very fast, discomfort in the abdomen. It's very, very unsettling. So it's not just like the normal thing we kind of feel, but there's an intense, excessive kind of worry and anxiety the person experiences. Coming to panic attacks, those are something I think most people get to be a bit familiar with because you kind of see that a bit more in media spaces, amongst others. So a panic disorder is when someone experiences recurrent panic attacks. And the panic attack is a surge, like the person experiences a quick surge of this unbearable anxiety coming up, okay? And it doesn't last like hours, it's just a few minutes, but it will kind of peak and gradually go away. And during that period, it feels like the world is coming to an end. You can't breathe, you're choking, you're having chest tightness, very discomforting, trembling, sweating, having your heart beating very fast. It's a very intense period. And that's experience is something that is quite um, it's remarkable. It leaves an impression. And after that experience, as I said, panic disorder is recurrence of these. But just like sometimes, so there are types that you can kind of the unexpected and the expected. But generally, you might not know what might trigger it. So the person lives with this constant fear of when the next episode is going to happen because you can't predict which setting is going to happen. Is it with people you're familiar with? Is it people you're not familiar with? And some worry about even how others around will understand the whole episode. So it keeps recurring and you can't really predict. And with that, some people get rushed to the hospital for it being assumed as an asthmatic attack or heart attack. And then they might be examined thoroughly and found that not really, it is a panic attack and a panic disorder, which needs to be managed adequately. So, as you can imagine, this also would end up having a lot of repercussions with one's functioning, especially if it keeps occurring quite frequently. There are times where someone might actually, whilst just waking up, you wake up in that attack, and it can be quite intense as well. Yes.